Hello and welcome to episode 13 of Shared Discovery, the show and podcast dedicated to sharing all the exciting and enjoyable aspects of games and gaming. I'm your host Victor, and I am once again joined by my returning co-host Ron. Ron, how you been?
I'm doing well. Been up to fun things lately. How you been, Victor?
I've been doing great, man. I am super excited because we're finally going to talk about vampires. So that's been keeping me busy. I've been thinking about vampires all week. Actually, weeks.
Right ahead to vampires.
Yeah, so I've been super excited. But we got to try a couple new games yesterday.
We did.
We got to play a couple party games. We get to play the voting game, where you read a prompt off, and then everyone votes on who's the most like that person.
Good light fare.
Good light fun game. And then what was the other one? Categories. Where you're given prompts and you roll a die with different letters and you have to meet those prompts with letters that fit that. So like, what's a good gift that starts with K?
And then you can't have the same answer as anybody else, or else you don't get the points.
So those, not my go-to games. I wouldn't choose them if I had the option, but they were fun. They were a good time. I learned a lot from them. Yeah. So we had really good conversation out of those questions.
Categories is one I've been playing for years.
Yeah.
It's just a go-to party game.
Yeah, you nailed it. Like when we were playing, you were killing it. So that being said, I think I jumped ahead. You told me I jumped ahead. So
what?
I jumped ahead to spoil it. We're talking about vampires.
Vampires.
Yes. So what is a vampire, Ron?
Yes, using the Socratic method, we ask now, what is vampire? What is a vampire?
Is a vampire?
A vampire is any creature, it doesn't have to be humanoid, it doesn't have to be human shape, any creature that drains life or consumes blood from humans.
Yes. Yeah, any kind of creature. It'll evolve over time, but that's the definition we're going to be using the whole episode. Pretty simple, and that definition will evolve and change as we go through the history a little bit. But for this, we're going to, like you said, go over the history. Where did vampires come from? What are the origins of them?
Oh, yeah. Origins, right? This is my section.
Yeah,
so the history and origins of vampires is like old, really old.
It's very old, ancient.
Before
I think
civilization?
before we dive into that, we do need a disclaimer, I think it's really important for these history episodes.
Yeah, we're not going to touch on everything.
There's so much.
So much information. Just think of this as like a guided tour through
what is the history?
Vampires.
What are the commonalities of vampires and their abilities, their weaknesses across the mythologies?
Right.
And what do they look like? How does that represented in games?
Yeah.
That's the end point there. So the history of vampires is massive. Like I've been researching it and I'm like, this could be the whole podcast.
The rabbit hole just keeps going.
It just keeps going. So we're going to give just an overview of that and some of the resources that I got this from. The Wikipedia page, that was
easy,
infinitely long to begin with, right? And then I found, it's called the Unnatural World Fandom Wiki, and it consolidated a bunch of different vampire wikis into one wiki to talk about the common abilities, uncommon weaknesses, how vampires are made. Thank you, whoever did that, thank you. That's a lot of homework.
It's a really impressive aggregate of all weird, unnatural, spooky, scary stuff.
Like, what can they do? How do you hurt them? Where does it come from? Because vampires are across so many different fandoms. They're like, let's shove this together. They made this episode a lot easier, thankfully. Thank you. And then the last resource that I used a lot was a YouTube video on John Solo's YouTube channel. That was redundant. But he has a podcast called the Messed Up Origins Podcast.
Okay.
So he had a Messed Up Origins of Vampires. So I drew a lot from there. So thank you, Mr. John Solo. So, all right, disclaimers, resources out of the way.
Out of the way.
Tell us some of the ancient beliefs about vampires.
Vampires have existed since ancient times. We're talking like biblical, pre-biblical, like way long time ago. And it starts with tales of supernatural beings that just consume flesh, and they're like not human. They're something from another world, from beyond, right?
And me only knowing the modern version of vampires, this was cool for me to learn. Right.
Yeah, and they appear in every culture and every mythology, but they don't always look the same. They, like Japanese vampires look different than Chinese, then look different than European vampires, and you know they have different starting points. But every civilization has these.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird.
It is weird, and it's like I listed some of them that from the wiki: the Mesopotamians, the Hebrews, ancient Greeks, Romans, Manipuri.
It's like ancient India, like
Ancient India. Okay.
Bengal Delta.
Sure.
I think.
Yeah, and so they are across all of these mythologies, and the only really the common thing across them was that they eat the blood, the flesh, or the life force of humans, but none of them were actually humans themselves, undead, right? That came later.
Yeah, they're devils and deities and weird spirits and all that jazz. And one of the first vampire stories in history is Sekhmet from the Egyptian god.
This story
goddess.
was really cool. This is the first time I heard of this.
It's metal as all get
It's
out,
super
yeah.
metal. Yeah, I liked it. It was Sekhmet is a lion-headed goddess, warrior goddess that served Ra, the god of the sun. And Ra was like, okay, you need to go to Egypt, cleanse the non-believers, right? Make them believe in me again,
Okay.
right? Go down there. So he's like, just enough so no, I'm here still. She does. She goes to Earth, starts killing, but she gets a taste for blood. And she likes it a little too much.
That's sweet
Sweet blood. So it can't get quenched, so she keeps eating and eating and eating until Egypt is almost out of people. And Ra's like, whoa.
That's not what you're supposed to do.
No. I still need believers.
Yeah.
So he goes down there, and what he does is he dyes some alcohol red, and he puts it into the river, and it makes the Nile turn red, and Sekhmet just keeps drinking the river until she passes out.
She just wanted to drink red stuff.
I guess so. It's like Marceline from Adventure Time.
Yeah, that's a good connection.
And so she just drank until she passed out, and then when she woke up, she calmed down, never ate flesh anymore, right? Never drank blood anymore, but it was like that legacy stuck. So I thought that was a really cool story of like the first vampire.
Hardcore, killing most of the people of Egypt.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like Ra's like, dude, chill. So that's the ancient beliefs, right? And over folklore and mythology in the 16th and 18th centuries, that's where vampires started to evolve into what we know them as today.
It really took a long time.
It did.
Thousands of years,
So
tens
long.
of thousands of years for that image to change.
Absolutely. And
What were people doing?
they were dealing with demons and spirits.
They
and
were dealing with
deities.
demons and spirits.
That's what they were doing. And so these folklores, vampires became undead creatures, right? Undead being humans come back to life. And these tales mostly come from Southeast Europe between the 16th and 18th centuries.
It's like the Balkans, that area.
Yeah, Serbia, that kind of.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. And so, regardless of the origin, almost all the folklore vampires are undead, return to life, and they drink blood and they consume the life force. Same as the vampires before, right? That's the connecting factor here. Except now they're humans returned to life. But they looked a lot different than they do today,
Oh, really?
right? Because they were usually described as bloated in appearance.
More corpse-like.
More corpse-like,
Yeah.
right? Because that's one of, which we'll get into in a second, one of like the explanations of how people believed in vampires, right? But they are purple, dark in color, long teeth, growing hair, nails, but they never really had fangs.
Yet.
That will evolve in a second when
They were just dead people.
they were
pretty
just
much.
dead people, right? And
Kind of reminds me of zombies a little, you know?
exactly, they were zombies, and one of the things I read, it was they're zombies with a specific diet.
Yeah.
That's the way it was put.
There you go.
And so some of the explanations for the origins of vampire beliefs and the mass hysteria, as it was called, because it would get to the point where whole villages would go and dig up corpses and stab them, stake them through the chest. And there have been hundreds of bodies found with metal stakes holding them in their graves.
Oh yeah, they would even build like custom coffins that had like metal like hooks to like hook the person in so that they could never get up, or like they'd build cages over the top of graves so that nobody could escape the grave.
It's crazy the lengths they went to, right?
Yeah.
I heard about like putting sickles like attached to the top of the coffin.
It's like
So if
somebody's job.
So if they got up, it would stab them and they couldn't get up and eat people, right?
Like somebody's job in olden days was being the vampire guy.
Was attaching sickles to coffins.
Yeah, here's some dinar or whatever.
Yeah.
Here's some coins. How do I stop my brother from coming back as a vampire? Yeah.
How do I stop that? And there are so many weird ways. Another one was putting a scythe next to the grave, so it made it easy for death to come get the spirit.
Oh man, my tool's right here.
I got it right here.
finish the job.
I'm getting this guy. Easy peasy. Thank you, village.
I thought the scythe was metaphorical, but I guess sometimes it's real.
Sometimes it's real. So some of the reasons for this was a misunderstanding the process of death and decomposition. Right, so they would hear sounds in the grave, like chewing sounds, bubbling sounds. The body's decaying. You're gonna hear stuff.
Yeah, that's
But they're
vile.
like, something's in there. So they dig it up, and a couple things would happen. The body would look like it didn't decay much, because different soils, different temperatures, different body compositions can change decay rates.
Totally.
But blood would come out, because that's kind of what happens when you're decomposing. So they'd be like, this person's been teleporting out of their grave, and they've been eating for the past 9 days, right? Which is linked to the next reason, which is associating with disease outbreaks, right? So someone dies, a disease comes around.
Totally makes sense.
And then they die to a disease, and then people start dying soon after them.
It's not like they had germ theory.
No.
They had no idea of what illness was, so easy answer, dead guy in the grave.
Coming out of the grave, right? And then another look for the decomposition was the bloating look. As air fills up, they've been eating blood, right? Premature burials. They said this one was a rare one, but sometimes you could hear someone banging if they were prematurely buried, right?
Because, you get a suppressed, like, breathing or reduced heart rate, and back then they're just like, he looks dead. Throw him in the hole. We can't wait around to find out if he's not dead.
Exactly.
What? We have farms to run.
We got other vampires to deal with. And the vampire guy, right?
Just put a cage around it.
Put a cage around.
Just ask the vampire guy.
Just put a scythe. It's fine. It's fine. Then you had psychodynamic theories, so psychology theories of like unconscious drives or defense mechanisms. Like, they'll be back next week. They couldn't actually die. They'll come back to visit me, right?
Okay.
So that was one that I thought of, that I read. I thought of, I'm Freud.
Yeah, really.
Then you had political interpretations. That's what we were talking about a few weeks ago. Yeah, the rich guy up on the hill in his castle, sapping the resources out of the peasants.
Very culturally significant, very like in vogue at the time of we're just know-nothing peasants farming our dirt, and the High Lord Vlad Dracula is impaling 100,000 Turks a week over here. Exactly. I don't know what any of this means.
What could that be except a vampire?
Exactly.
Right?
He's lived more than 10 years as a king, which is way longer than any king I've ever known to survive.
A huge amount of time. And then you had psychopathology, so mental disorders.
Is this where like poisoning would come in, or is that more physiological?
I feel like that'd be more physiological, but maybe as you say that, maybe poisons could present as a psychological disorder.
Because there was poisoning that happened a lot in ye olden times that we now, we genetically bred ergot, so it doesn't do it anymore, but it's like a mold that they would eat. You can't really tell that ergot has this mold on it, but then when you would make it, it would make your food psychedelic. And so these poor peasants were eating their bread, their awful ergot poisoned bread, and just tripping having horrifying nightmare trips, and then a lot of that's like witch hunts and vampires.
And the vampire mass hysteria. Yeah, absolutely. I didn't read about that one, but that totally makes sense
I
here
could
for
see
the
it being
psychopathology.
right there.
Absolutely. And then the last reason they said was vampire bats, which actually was
It's real.
It's a retcon. It was misattributed to vampires because vampire bats don't exist in Europe.
No way.
During those time periods. They may have been moved there. Don't quote me on that. But during that time period, vampire bats were in South America and in the Americas, actually.
They're just discovering them probably and being like, this is crazy.
That's obviously it.
Everywhere,
Yeah, well, that's where the vampire myth comes from. So
It's horrifying.
so history retcons are cool.
Yeah.
So that is the folklore, but vampires, they're not bloated corpses or just fancy zombies anymore. So
Fancy
how did we
lads.
get to the vampires we know today? Like, there's a couple people that led to this.
Right. It was sort of like a revolution that happened slowly at first, and then now we have just so much romantic vampire literature. We don't know what to do with it all, right?
So much, yes.
It started out in this weird, awkward period in the 1800s, 1819, with The Vampire by, let me see if I get this right, John Polidori.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And there's
That
a
sounds good to
whole,
me.
there was a whole like, I guess conspiracy theory that Byron actually, Lord Byron, actually
interesting.
wrote this story, and this guy just stole it from him and wrote like a longer version and then actually published it. And that's why this character is so seemingly close in attribution, close in style and like how they act and everything to Lord Byron himself.
Wow.
And that's why a lot of these vampires that we'll be talking about, like Dracula, well, Dracula's kind of a more prim and proper type of guy, but Byron's more the flamboyant, Aristotelian, like just has amorality and like no conscience and stuff like that. A lot of that comes from him.
Yeah.
But
And
that's the vampire.
And I will say here, this vampire is vampire with a Y instead of an I.
Yeah.
So if you're looking this up and you want to check into this, it's The Vampire with a Y.
Yeah, 1819 is the publication.
1819, yes. And this was like, in my research, it was like the origins of the charismatic, sophisticated vampires.
Lord Byron.
Lord Byron, right?
Yep. And if you want to know more about that sort of origin of the sophisticated vampire, look into Lord Byron. He wrote things.
He wrote things.
I think so.
Okay.
He wrote things. He hung out with like Mary Shelley, which is where you get Frankenstein from, Mary Shelley. And yeah, so that's the start right there, is this weird period with like poets and Gothic writers writing about these fun fantasies and creatures.
Absolutely.
Vampire and Frankenstein, all these monsters start out in this similar time period.
This early 1800
Yeah.
period start forming what we know of as
Right.
the vampires.
And like 50 years later, you get the next vampire story. It starts real slow, and it's Carmilla. There's probably a bunch of other vampire stories in there somewhere, but not as significant as Carmilla, which is about a Styrian, which is a type of German mountain Austrian place up in the mountain, Styria. It's about a woman from Styria who, what is this, like a lesbian, preyed upon young female, coming of age.
And it's and it's not explicitly stated in the book, lesbian, but it's like the undertone, right?
Right.
That it's there.
Hinting,
It's
like,
hinting there, and it's
always shadow over
always
everything.
shadow, and it's this female vampire that's going after young females.
That's it. Yeah, preying on young females.
And this was written by, I love this name, Joseph Thomas Sheridan Lafana. I think I said that. Lafana?
I think so. Lafanu?
Lafana? That's a great name.
It's French,
It's
yeah.
a long one.
Is
Yeah.
that French?
Yep.
It's probably French. And that's 1872, so that's a good 50 years after. And then the great, like, I think watershed moment comes in 1897 with Dracula by Bram Stoker. Bram.
And we all know
Bram,
Dracula.
Bram. Yeah, everyone knows Dracula.
Everyone knows Dracula.
The original, the OG. Like, a lot of people think this is the first vampire story, but it's definitely the one that has like all of the elements, like him turning into animals, him seducing women, him having a big castle somewhere in Transylvania, and like
This is
cowboys
where,
and
like,
all sorts
it may not be the first story, but it's the quintessential story that we get the tropes from. The powers, the abilities, the
I
weaknesses.
think Van Helsing even shows up in this, and it's like the first iteration of this story, and if he's as critical a piece as any part of Dracula.
Oh,
He's
absolutely.
there in the first story about Dracula.
That's so funny. Like Van Helsing, the 2004 movie, was my first exposure to vampires. Actually, it's super cool.
Yeah, that was one of mine as well, but it's like, looking back at it, it's not the best movie. Doesn't quite hold up, but I thought it was fun.
I thought it was fun. I watched it a lot. We didn't have cable, so boom, boom, replay that a lot.
Oh, yeah, $1 rentals, man.
Didn't have cable or internet, man.
It's all about. But Dracula, yeah, even better than everything that came before it. Spawned the modern vampire genre for sure. And from there, it was just
Boom.
tons of books,
Vampire
tons of
explosion.
novels, and then it was only a matter of time because book adaptations in movies are as old as movies, and book adaptations.
Oh, as old as movies is right here.
Yeah, and that's where we get Nosferatu,
Yes.
1922. I guess Count Orlok is the protagonist.
Yeah, Count Orlok is the name of the vampire. And I didn't know this until looking it up. I was one of these people that thought the vampire was Nosferatu. But his name is actually Count Orlok.
Yeah, Nosferatu must be like the concept or something. I'm not clear on that one.
I'm not clear. I didn't read into it too much, but that was 1922.
Right at the big dawn of like movies. That's
yeah,
the thing.
as old as movies, yeah.
And supposedly it ripped off so many ideas from actual Count Dracula that Bram Stoker's estate, his family, sued the makers of this.
Yeah, they sued the makers of it. They won, and all the copies were ordered to be destroyed. But obviously some were saved, and now it's cultural classic.
Yeah, it's a foundational movie.
It's a foundational movie.
Wow.
And so those are like, that's the foundations. Those are the foundations of the modern vampire.
Good start. Where does it go from here, Victor?
And it just explodes from here. It goes in every form of media from here. You see it in Blade. Blade is a vampire, half vampire slayer character.
This being the follow-up to Nosferatu.
I know. Isn't it strange?
It's an interesting pick.
It's an interesting pick, but it's like, it's so huge, right? It became part of comics. Like, comics were huge for a long time, from like the 30s, 40s onwards, and then it's just, vampires started becoming a part of that. And I chose this to show, like, from this point forward, vampires is a part of every media. Everything.
Pervasive.
It's pervasive. So July 1917 is the first appearance of Blade. He then gets 3 movies from 1998 to 2006. And even gets a 1-season TV show that didn't last long.
Oh my.
Then the very first vampire video game is called The Count in 1979.
Does that even have graphics?
It's a text-based adventure game, actually.
Oh.
So no.
Graphics, yeah.
So no.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to look up how many vampire games exist. How many games are there that vampires are just the core essence of it? And
Like 5.
that's it, right?
Right.
No, not at all. So Wikipedia's list of the vampire games, these are games where you, the character, is the vampire, the main antagonist is the vampire, or vampires are heavily focused. And they even say, it's an incomplete list, but there's nearly 100 games on there. Like, that's huge. And then just 23 of those is Castlevania alone.
Like a quarter of all vampire games on Wikipedia.
Castlevania video games. And Castlevania is a video game series that started in 1986. It is like a gothic horror side-scrolling adventure game where you play a vampire hunter going into Dracula's castle trying to kill him. That was so successful, it literally has become a pillar category for games.
I love it so much.
And what pillar categories are is it's a category where you can say a name and you know a whole genre. So when you say Metroidvania, that's a whole genre of games. Boom, that communicates all of these things, right? Another pillar genre are Souls-like games.
Oh yeah.
So based on Dark Souls or roguelike games, based on the first roguelike. The second roguelike, actually. There was one that came before it, but the most popular.
Is that GURPS? What was that?
I can't remember. I did look this up recently, but it. We'll have a roguelike episode.
We'll talk about
roguelike. But in 1980 is when Rogue came out. So Castlevania is so impactful, it defines a genre alongside Metroid, right?
Yeah.
It's huge. And then after that, in 1991, you have Vampire the Masquerade, the tabletop role-playing game.
This is fun. This is a fun.
I've never played this. This sounds super cool.
It's a blast. It's really storytelling focused, so the mechanics are really minimal. It's not like Dungeons and Dragons where you got tables and charts and dice all over the place. It's really simple. You just make a character. What are they good at? What are they bad at? Here's their backstory. Boom. It's narrative. Let's get into it.
Let's get into it.
Let's roll some dice. Let's see what happens.
Survive as a vampire.
Yep. And it's got tons of successful additions onto it as well about like werewolves and wizards and all sorts of good stuff.
Yeah, it got a card game in 1994. It was actually made by Richard Garfield, who made Magic the Gathering.
I might have to look at that.
It has video games attached to it as well.
Which is a notoriously like indie underground type of a video game where like you can't even play it without mods.
Really?
Because it's just never got fixed.
Okay.
It's just jank.
It's just that janky.
Yeah.
That was the word that came, jank. We're on the same page.
Oh yeah. Just hacked together code.
So, bring us from the 90s to now. Like, what are some popular vampire things?
Well, the 90s kicked off pretty solidly with Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie.
Yep.
I didn't really like this movie. Have you seen the movie?
I haven't seen the movie. I was told to
Seen the
skip
show,
it.
right?
I've seen the show, yeah.
Yeah, everyone I've talked to says skip it. I didn't skip it. It was a mistake.
Okay.
It's really bad.
But it was popular enough to spawn a whole series.
I don't get that. Yeah, like how did you get a TV show off of this? But I guess standards were different in the 90s.
You know, it's
right?
hilarious. For this, I was like, there has to be a podcast about vampires that goes over the history of vampires.
Yes.
So I just typed in vampire podcast. I found like 20 Buffy podcasts. Buffy's huge.
Oh yeah, I was trying to find exactly the same thing, vampire podcast, and I had to just shovel through like this mountain.
Did you find one?
Yeah.
You did? Okay. I got through like 60 and it was like Buffy, 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 what we do in the shadows, Buffy, Buffy.
It's just every single one of them is like pop culture, like.
And if it wasn't Buffy,
specific
it
genre.
was Angel, which
That
is a
makes
Buffy
sense.
spinoff.
Yeah, he is a vampire.
He
so,
is a vampire.
despite the name, and that's 92, and that movie just kind of coasts for like 5 years, and then the TV show happens in 1997 until 2003 with its spin-offs and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, I didn't even include Angel on here, but that lasted until like 2006, I think.
Yeah, it was good 6 seasons or something like that. And then there was video games from 2000 to 2000.
They actually got 3 video games. Buffy got some video games on the Game Boy and the PlayStation. Yeah, it was wild. And GameCube.
They're good.
I didn't look if they were good or not.
Yeah, they exist.
They
that's all we can
exist.
say.
Yes.
And jumping back to the 90s, in 1993, Magic the Gathering hits shelves with
the very first vampire.
Singular Vampire.
Yep, and if you look at the card art on that, it looks almost like identical to Count Orlok.
Oh, so they're continuing the stealing images idea going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they are using that like bald, white, big fang, kind of gross-looking vampire.
Gross is right.
And vampires have been in Magic ever since. Like every single set, it's hugely popular. We got 2 right here. Got a whole vampire deck, courtesy of our show runner Len over there.
Yep, laying on the floor currently, but that's all right. We don't hold it against her. And Magic the Gathering is great.
It's so fun.
Yeah, it's got a lot of.
We did 2 episodes on that.
Let's not dwell.
We'll
Moving
get back
right on, there's a typo, and then the Underworld series, which I watched most of these movies and enjoyed them.
These are like really craptacular.
Yeah, Craptacular is a great.
So they're so fun. But that's it, right? You're not. There's no engaging story. You're just like, woo, action, vampire, werewolves, let's go.
Yeah, it's just like all the vampires in Buffy look the same. All the vampires in this look the same, even though they're going for like way higher budget and stuff. And the werewolves look goofy in their costumes and that early CG.
Oh yeah. Ooh, that werewolf CG and costumes. Oh yeah.
God, I remember a scene where it's just like you can tell that it's just a dude wearing a costume and someone's like punching the like face of the costume.
Yeah.
Wiggles around and
Peak cinema.
Peak cinema.
Peak craptacular cinema.
Truly Kino.
Oh man, we can't talk about vampires without talking about the next one.
2016, yeah, the next
Yeah,
one. I read the books, I watched all the movies. This is Twilight.
Twilight.
This is the Twilight
we have
books
to
movies.
talk about Twilight.
2005 is when this started off. And
I was amazed by this too.
2016?
The most recent book came out in 2016.
What?
It kept going.
I didn't know there was more.
Isn't that? Yeah, that's wild.
I might have to.
People love of Twilight, right?
Right. The movies, they all came out. They were just crowd pleasers. Everybody went to see them.
Again, more craptacular. Goodness.
Couldn't resist them.
Couldn't resist it.
Well, I read every single book and can probably do a critique on that someday, but I don't really feel like getting into it.
Are there Twilight video games?
There should be, I would make an argument that there should be one Twilight video game, and it should be a baseball video game.
Oh my
With
God.
all the characters
The best scene in all the series.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. They're playing Supermassive Black Hole by Muse, and they're playing baseball. Like, just make that a game.
Make it a game.
Twilight baseball. All the characters in the entire series.
In our game
play
design
baseball.
series, that's what we can design.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Let's do it.
Yeah, the Twilight baseball game.
We'll have to plan that for episode 313.
It'll have a draft element at the start where you draft your players.
Draft your
I
player.
can see it.
Okay. And then the last thing in our timeline, moving past Twilight, we got vampire powers to talk about. So
We do have those.
what is the current place for vampires in our world? I love this one. I love this one. We've watched all of this show, this series.
Oh, What We Do in the Shadows, is definitely peak vampire entertainment for me.
Vampires went from evil killing machines to mockumentary characters.
Doofuses in 2014. I don't know if it was New Zealand or Australia.
I think it was New Zealand.
New Zealand movie.
Yep.
It's about vampires living in New Zealand, having relocated there, and going through the trials and tribulations of the mockumentary life, and absolute brilliance.
It's super goofy.
Yeah.
And it was goofy and popular enough to get a show that is still going. 2019 to current, it's the 5th season's coming out next month. It's so good. Highly recommend. So
Yes.
we went from non-human demon Sekhmet to goofy mock office style vampires.
Blood gods. I don't even know, man.
It's wild. It's so interesting. But we're gonna get into games, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're here for. So step one of game. What can vampires do, right? So what are their powers? What are their weaknesses? What are their abilities? So we're gonna go over that here. We found the common abilities, the uncommon abilities, and their weaknesses. And these are across fandoms, right? Mythologies.
Yeah, we're not
folklores.
specifying any specific fandom. This could apply to all the vampires, or this could apply to none of the
and
vampires. It's just the most common.
Exactly. And remember, that wiki page was consolidated across the most common vampires in media. So here we go. I'm going to take some of the common abilities. We'll let you get into uncommon abilities, and then we'll talk about some of our favorite vampires in games. So common ability number 1 is vampirism. You gotta have vampirism. So sharp claws, pointy, retractable fangs, right? And then it's said to mainly bite the victim's neck and extract the blood from the artery.
This is aesthetic as all get
It
out.
is.
Like, really.
Then you have superhuman strength, superhuman speed, superhuman okay, I could have listed these all together. Superhuman agility, superhuman
I think that
durability, senses.
Superhuman senses, superhuman, like that's just really like most vampires.
That's
like
it,
99%, right?
So vampires, like, they can possess strength equal to 100 plus strong men. They can move faster than bullets at point blank range, right? And what I really liked here too, that stood out to me about their speed, so they're extremely quick. They can move faster than the human eye can see.
Yes.
And then their sheer speed combined with their stealth, because a lot of them are just really stealthy, can blend into the shadows. Some can even turn invisible, which we'll get into later, right? And uncommon abilities.
Yes.
But like, their prey just you can't do anything with that speed. But what I liked is that some of them will actually turn into bats to go even faster than their humanoid form.
They're the ultimate predators.
Ultimately predators, absolutely. And they have this unhuman stamina where they can run great speeds for long times. It's nearly impossible to tire out a vampire, right? It's because they just have this huge degree of endurance. They don't need to sleep. They don't need food. They can't drown. They don't need oxygen. As long as they have blood, they're gone.
This really puts vampire hunting into perspective.
It really does.
These are killing machines.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to kill a vampire if it's just...
You watch those movies where the vampires are struggling, it's like, well, I'd do it this way. These are These are our monsters, killing machines, right? And they're extremely nimble. They can scale sheer force, like sheer 90-degree surfaces. Amazing speed.
You see that all the time in Buffy.
They could
climb.
Oh yeah. They can jump further than a normal human. They can dodge. I already said this, but bullets at point blank. And then this was just like, okay, you can do all of that, and then you have this. But the superhuman senses, sight, smell, hearing, touch, superhuman keenness, perfect vision in the dark. They can detect body heat. They can hear on par with bats or owls. And bats have wonderful hearing because of their echolocate.
Yeah.
They're just cheating.
They just get all the good stuff.
They can smell as good as a wolf or a dog.
So I feel like werewolves are falling behind here.
I feel like they're falling behind a little, but
Vampires
we'll get to the
versus
weakness. We'll
werewolves.
see that. We'll see a little.
Right.
Werewolves will come up in the weaknesses. Don't worry. They can literally see blood and brain activity in people. Some vampires can see the blood moving through you and which parts of the brains you're using.
That just sounds uncomfortable.
Can
you turn that off, or is it always on?
I hope they can turn it off. I hope it's like a switch they can turn on. So they have all of that. Then they have this healing factor where poison, suffocation, extreme cold, aging, drowning, disease, none of that can kill a vampire.
Oh yeah, like Alucard is always like, oh, I'm going to, the son of Dracula, I'm going to sleep for 1,000 years or whatever, and they just do it.
They just do it.
Freeze themselves.
It's just a
or go to
choice.
bed, like,
And what's really fascinating about Alucard, which we'll get into here in a little bit, is that Alucard is a Castlevania character who is Dracula's son, but he's half vampire, half human.
Yep.
So as a protagonist in the game, you can see the strengths and weaknesses he has as being part human.
oh yeah.
They're immortal. If you didn't get that already,
Classic.
they're immortal.
What?
Some of the oldest vampires live between 1,000 to 10,000 plus years old.
Yeah, what series has vampires that aren't immortal?
Exactly. Hypnosis. They can dominate the minds of humans and animals.
Because this is probably the least common of the commons, in that like you see it a lot in stuff like the Interview with the Vampire or whatever movie, and stuff like that, where they're manipulating normal humans, or I don't know. I'm forgetting all of my famous vampire shows and movies, but it shows up a lot. But then there's some where it's just like, no, they don't have these abilities, even though I would say it is a pretty
I think it's pretty common. Like they even make fun of it in What We Do in the Shadows. They make fun of all of these abilities and what they do in the shadows. But what with hypnosis, like with the simple wave of your hand, eye contact, you can control a human. A lot of them can. And what I've found with all of these powers, which makes vampires even stronger, is they don't get weaker with age. They get stronger. All of these powers develop with age. So their hypnosis gets even stronger with age to the point that if they need to, they can just crush a human's mind and turn them insane. And we see that in what we do in the shadows.
Oh yeah, brain scramblies, but that's generally, a commonality is the older vampires are always the stronger, the eldest. And then in like Vampire the Masquerade, the antediluvians, which are the vampires before vampires were a thing, like the prehistoric times.
The
of, like,
ancient ones.
the city of Atlantis that was dragged into the ocean was like a vampire city, and it was like run by these families, and that's where we get vampires today, is these like corruptors, these like original vampires that go out and make vampires.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool.
Oh yeah.
So a couple of the common abilities left here: shapeshifting, turning into bats, regular sized or demon sized. You can turn into swarms of bats, rats, mist, smoke,
I was
wolves.
gonna say different animals,
And then
bears maybe.
Bears, the stronger you get, you can turn into bigger things. So one of it said that you can turn into a dragon. The strongest vampires can turn into dragons.
Vlad Dracula was the dragon, right?
Yeah.
So that suits.
Exactly. And then the last two things here were a true face or a true form. So a vampire's true face is the appearance they're hiding under their normal human face.
So some vampires change their face, like in Buffy. Okay.
So like when that gross face, the fangs come out, like this will come out when you're hungry. Like the scleras, the white part of your eyes will turn red, your fangs will appear, and as blood rushes to your face, and you get ready to go for the kill. So this happens under like extreme emotion, like bloodlust, anger, love, whatever it is. And when you're hungry, and sometimes they can't control it because they're just hungry, and that demon-looking face will come out. And then the oldest vampires have what's called a true form, which they can turn into a big monstrous form, like demon-like form that gives them really strong powers.
Yeah. Great example in Underworld. They have tons of ancient vampires doing like true form stuff all over the place. So
okay, I downloaded all of those. I want to rewatch them. Oh yeah. So I didn't do that this week. Get some research in, because man, I had a great time watching those growing up. So tell us some about the uncommon abilities.
Uncommon abilities are, uncommon. I guess it's the vampire abilities that you get every once in a while, but it's not consistent across the whole genre like you saw with the previous ones. And this is like telepathy, which is talking to people in their minds, talking to each other. I think this one shows up in Dracula, the original Dracula. Nice. But also kind of mixed in with hypnosis. I feel like telepathy and hypnosis kind of go hand in hand.
These mental abilities, I think hypnosis makes it so they are easily to be swayed, but telepathy means you can directly just hear their thoughts. Yeah. That's probably the distinction there.
I very much feel like the original Dracula had the both going.
Okay, makes sense.
That's how he communicated to people and used his hypnosis, is that he would like speak into your brain directly.
That's crazy.
Yeah, he was super powerful. Atmokinesis, which is just the control of the atmosphere. I think this is another one Dracula had, where he would literally change weather conditions to like slow people down and like slow down the vampire hunters. Telekinesis, which is moving objects with your brain, right?
Yep.
It always makes that weird noise, like a theremin.
We have to know it's happening. We can't see it's happening.
No, so there's got to be some signifier that there's floating objects about. Electrokinesis, which is just projecting lightning from your own body, like Darth Sidious.
Yes. Unlimited power.
Yeah, you got the quote right there. And then flight. This is classic vampire behavior, is flying.
Yeah, and this is different from shapeshifting. This is your humanoid vampire form. You can just float around.
You're flying as a bat, or just flying as a body awkwardly flying through the air.
So the uncommon one is just your older vampires will just get the ability to fly without shapeshifting into a bat.
I feel like flying just as a human, in this sense of just kind of like taking off like a rocket, it looks weird.
It does look
I don't know, like just, do you go at an angle or do you go straight head first? Yeah, just
Stiff.
stiff leg, stiff arm.
Yeah.
You don't like
Oh,
looking
man.
forward. Maybe it just looks so goofy
It
in
does
my
look
mind.
it's
That's why
really silly.
Superman does the.
I know,
push
to
forward.
make it look like cool.
Like I'm
'Cause you
doing
don't have
something,
to.
right?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
don't have to do that.
You just like, can you fly sideways? Like just drift.
Probably, yeah.
You can just fly in any awkward
It's
position.
just for the
sitting.
audience for it to make sense.
I'm sorry, I'm getting off track.
Yeah,
with
yeah,
this
yeah,
one.
yeah. We got to get to some games.
Necromancy, which is being able to bring things back from the dead,
Yup.
which some vampires can through like intricate like blood transfusion ways and all that jazz. But for the most part, they don't make zombies a lot. Like the freshly dead, maybe.
It's a rare ability, but
It's
you'll
not
see it sometimes. You'll see it in Castlevania occasionally.
That would make sense,
Yeah.
yeah. And like vampires and necromancers hang out because vampires are dead and necromancers like dead stuff. So
Exactly.
commonalities.
You can trade or research.
Right. Dream manipulation. I think this is another Dracula thing, is he would invade people's dreams and mess with their heads.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty classic, invading people's dreams and messing with their heads. Cell manipulation. This is what?
This one
is
was wild. This is the first time I've seen this.
Wow. Older vampires, they can just control living and dead cells to create life. I don't think I've seen this
I
one.
haven't seen this one before either.
This is like a messianic, like Christ-like.
It was a weird one, but gotta list it. It was on
Yeah.
there.
All right.
It must be in some. Tell if you know where this comes from. Like,
let us know.
Let us know. Email us.
The
sharediscoveryshow@gmail.com.
Yeah. Because I really want to read a story about a vampire that manipulates cells.
Me too.
Like, can you just cure cancer with that?
I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Then not only can they control cancer, but they can control animals.
Ooh, yeah.
Animal control, that'd be handy for the
This is
city.
really handy power.
You get all those stray cats into the animal control van. Vampires.
Get in there.
Yeah.
Vampires could be so useful.
Right?
if they weren't also evil.
Right. And then blood bond, which is, I feel like it should be more common than uncommon, but I guess this isn't that common, so
I guess not.
that's why it's in this
Again, yeah,
category.
whoever made this aggregated it, so it must be a uncommon ability across the
Because like
franchises.
with thralls and like a lot of vampires have like kinship with the vampires they make,
Yeah.
or the almost vampires that they make, the thralls, which are just people that serve them
Yeah.
willingly or unwillingly. And the attempt to become vampires, sometimes they're controlled, sometimes they're
Yeah,
not.
yeah, and what this said here specifically, if they trade blood with a human,
Yeah.
in this case, they'll be able to sense the human's thoughts,
Yep.
their emotions, and they'll know if they're in distress or harm. Because sometimes vampires will come to care about a human, so
Yeah.
that's what this comes in.
It very much feels like the sort of like aspirational vampire. Like, oh, if you serve me for 100 years, I'll let you taste of my blood and I'll help you and all that. But yeah, the blood bonding.
The blood bond, yep. And then this power was OP.
Blood rising?
Yes, so this essentially,
I've never heard of it.
if a vampire who has its ashes together, they can still be brought back together by just adding blood to it. And it's OP. So
Any
like
blood?
depending on the blood that they get will determine how strong they become. So if you add human blood, they'll become weaker. Vampire blood, they'll be about the same. Dragon blood, you'll be stronger than you ever were before.
Is this an underworld rule? I don't know.
It's super interesting. So I'm gonna kind of blow through the weaknesses here because these are straightforward.
These are pretty.
You got silver, garlic. Veravan is a mystic herb that can poison vampires, burn their skin. Religious
Vervain. Yeah.
vervain
So-
and religious iconography, so like crosses and religious symbols can burn them, repel them. Sunlight, of course, the UV rays burn their skin. They can turn to ash, bones, gooey piles, it said. Dead man's blood can actually hurt them too. They want to eat fresh blood. A stake through the heart can harm them, but specifically with a silver stake, ash, hawthorn, or oak dug into the heart, those specific types of wood.
Ash Hawthorne. Oh, got it.
Yep, keep that in mind if we can't get some silver. Exsanguination or blood loss, if you can completely drain them of blood, how are they going to be living? Dismemberment, chop them apart.
That one
was
happens to
brutal.
Dracula.
That one's brutal.
Yeah.
Holy water, that's easy, right? Bless the water, sprinkle it on them, they burn. It can destroy one entirely. Hunger, If they don't eat, they're gonna die. They still have to eat.
And the classic ultimatum of being a vampire: do I eat and harm people, or do I not eat and kill myself?
Exactly. If a vampire gets some more morality, that becomes an issue for them. Desiccation, so completely draining them of blood. I feel like that's redundant.
Yeah.
So, invitation. So a vampire has to be invited into somewhere. But they can go in against their will, and if they do, they will bleed from their pores until they die.
Is it consistent with the blood, or?
So this is fairly consistent. A lot of them will say that they just can't come in. There's a magic barrier.
Right.
But this said that if they can push past that barrier, they will just bleed. Bleed out if they aren't invited by the host.
That one feels like another Buffy one.
Fire. It causes them a great deal of pain. They got dead flesh. They're going to light up.
Yeah.
Decapitation. Chop their head off. Burn the body.
Yep.
And then this is where werewolves come in.
Oh.
So werewolf bites can actually neutralize the vampire venom that's keeping you alive and cause you to die, cause you to deteriorate.
Hey,
so that's why they hate vampires so much, werewolves so much.
Chalk went up for the werewolves.
Chalk that up for them. And then magic. So witches are able to, vampires are susceptible to certain magic, and witches are able to use that magic to like control the blood and pull blood from their blood vessels.
Specifically witch magic.
That's what it said. Thanks, Wiki.
Yeah.
So
No wizard magic here.
So at
Witch magic only.
So we know what vampires are, we know where they come from, but
Yes.
why are they so popular in games? So we're going to dive into that here at the bottom of the hour. Using that right, by the way.
Yeah, there we go. We're running
So
out
give
of
us
the hourglass.
give us some reasons why they're so popular. Why are there probably more than 100 vampire games? Why are there 23 Castlevania games?
I like to think that they really capture the imagination with like power fantasy and aspiration, and like who doesn't want to be some rich Aristotelian who can just suck the life out of any living person, anyone in the world, that no one has power over you. You have absolute power, absolute control. You have all these super powers and super abilities. They're almost like a proto superhero, but like a super villain.
Yeah,
right?
that's a good way to put it, honestly.
Yeah.
It's like we just read through how powerful these are. So if you
Yeah.
put them in a game and you can become one of those,
It's potent.
it's potent. It feels good. A form of escapism, like I am the big bad. Or in games where you are not necessarily the big bad, but a powerful vampire, it feels good to just be able to use all of these hacks, as we call them in games.
Yeah.
But from a game design perspective, also, there are clear rules.
Very solid mechanics.
Very solid
When you
mechanics.
say
to build
vampire,
on.
you know what a vampire
You
is
know
going
what
to
it
do.
is. You know what they can and can't do, and you know how to build mechanics to emphasize that.
Yep. And you can add in little variations and twists, these
Mm-hmm.
uncommon ones here and there, and make your vampire your own, right?
Exactly, and we'll get into that in a little bit here. Some of our favorite representations of vampires, but like, it also allows the designers to tell compelling stories.
Yeah.
Because of the weaknesses that they have.
Oh,
it
yeah.
allows you to build a story around that. Tell a story about a villain. Tell a story about a vampire who wants to do good, right?
And with those like mechanics, those really hard, solid mechanics,
Mm-hmm.
foundational mechanics for vampires, it's just, okay, I know how to write this. You know, you just stay within these bounds.
Stay
here.
within those boundaries, and you can tell a really good story. And the last point, your favorite point.
Oh yeah, vampires are cool, man.
They're cool, man.
Don't know what else to tell you.
We told you the whole timeline. They've been around forever. People love them.
Yep.
They're just cool.
Right?
It's cool. It's
The
fun.
cool factor.
It's cool to figure out what they can do, how powerful you can make them. It's awesome.
Yeah, and since vampires are so cool, we have tons of vampires and things in media we consume.
Absolutely.
Stories we read that we really like, and
Yeah.
some examples.
Yeah, and my favorite one that I've been playing recently that I mentioned is called V Rising. It is a vampire survival game where you take on the role of a vampire who's been in hiding for years as the church overpowered them. You're
Right.
trying to rebuild your power. So you go around draining the blood from strong characters and humans in the world to get their powers. You literally build a castle. That's such a fun part. Like, it's castle simulator. And then some of the common weaknesses and strengths that they have is like they can use a lot of different types of magic. They're really fast, really strong. And then a core mechanic is you have to maintain the quality of the blood and how much blood you have within you. You're weak to sunlight, silver, fire, garlic, holy stuff. Oh, cool, another sheet.
Yeah, get it out of here. Get out of here.
And so it just feels good to get stronger and stronger magic, build your castle, and
It really does.
and control this world. Shape-shifting, you turn into bats, frogs, werewolves, bears, and then you have Skyrim. In Skyrim, you're the Dragonborn, you're the chosen one, but you fight vampires and you can become a vampire. You can become a lesser vampire by contracting that disease and not getting it cured. You'll get special abilities like vampiric drain, seduction, gain a servant, you get improved illusion spells. Then in the DLC, you can become a vampire lord,
I love this part.
which is sweet.
Oh, yeah.
See, by completing a quest chain, you can get this monstrous true form that we talked about.
Yep.
You can get bats, claws, raise the dead special abilities, and you even get your own talent tree.
Like, it looks like one of those elder vampires from Underworld. It's so good.
It's so good. And I know when that DLC came out, it was like you could get werewolves or you could turn into a werewolf or a vampire. I know so many friends that are like, werewolves are so cool. Vampires are cooler.
Yes.
How do I get that vampire lord form? Because it's amazing. You feel so powerful when you turn into that true form.
And with that mastery, it's easier to hide that you're a vampire. So,
Yeah, because if you get to a high enough stage of the lesser vampire form, people will just attack you in the
You're
game.
a monster.
You're a monster. And then The Witcher, I learned about Witcher vampires that they're really strong. So there were 7 different kinds.
But their strength is equal to their rarity.
The rarity, okay.
So that's why in a lot of the stories, Geralt will be like, it's not a vampire.
Okay.
You're lying. Like, you think it's a vampire, it's not a vampire. 9 times out of 10, it's not a vampire.
not a vampire.
And then when it is vampire, it's you're in trouble. This is above my pay
really
grade.
in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the "you're in trouble" is about the higher vampires that I learned about yesterday.
Yes, because if it's any chance of being a higher vampire, are you going to tango with a vampire? No, you're going to skip town and be like, I never heard of a vampire.
No, I'm out. And what I found is these vampires are really unique. The sunlight doesn't burn them.
Nope.
They're not weak to holy water, crucifix, garlic, the regular things. Silver hurts them, but it doesn't weaken them. And then the higher vampires are ridiculous.
They're pretty much
They're about
invincible.
broken.
Yeah.
And so Geralt, is that how you say-
Geralt.
Geralt, he can't actually kill them. The main character of the game, he is a monster slayer for hire, and
Yeah,
he can't
Witcher.
actually kill them. He can only weaken them, and then his ally, another higher vampire, has to kill them.
Yeah, that's Regis. And
So,
yeah.
back to compelling stories and game mechanics.
Right there.
There it is.
The main character is completely impotent in the face of vampire foe.
Yeah.
And a lot of the lesser vampires you can deal with and you can kill.
Okay, good.
But they're incredibly difficult to deal with if you're not prepared and you don't have certain potions and oils and your silver
So
sword.
even if it's lesser, you got to take it seriously.
Yeah, it's not gonna be easy.
Okay. That just blew my mind how strong Witcher
Right.
vampires are. It's terrifying. And it basically said, you're not going to kill them. You got to chop them apart and keep their body parts apart.
That's all you can do.
And then lastly here, I think we have time for one more. We'll talk about, we have to talk about Castlevania, right?
It is the quintessential.
Got to touch on Castle. It's the quintessential vampire game. So it is a gothic horror action adventure video games. They are.
So good.
You take on the role of a vampire hunter. You try to kill Dracula.
Too easy.
And so for this one, you're going to take on the role of one vampire, Alucard, but he's a half vampire. But for the most part, vampires are the big, scary boss fight villains.
Yeah.
And they have the power. Their powers may have changed across the games and stories, but they have the enhanced strength, the speed, the endurance, all kinds of magical abilities like fire, lightning, ice, wind, darkness, teleportation, psychic transformation, reincarnation.
Yep. Anything you can think of.
Oh my gosh.
Castlevania vampires.
They're very
do it.
strong too.
Yep.
And what's interesting about these is vampires are universally evil.
Yes.
in this verse. Like, that you become a vampire, you are evil. And Alucard's the exception to that because
He's
half human. But they do have the weaknesses. Unlike the Witcher, they're vulnerable to holy weapons. They're vulnerable to sunlight, no reflections. Extremely vulnerable to. This one I thought was funny. Extremely vulnerable to regular water. I thought
That's funny.
That was funny.
Yeah.
So.
Because in The Witcher, it's like a subversion of vampires. Like most things in The Witcher are subversion, and this is just no, they're vampires.
They're just vampires.
You get it.
You get it.
Yeah.
That's what they are. We've got our inspiration. So I think that wraps it up. We had one game left. It's called The Fury of Dracula. It's a vampire board game. Definitely recommend checking it out. It's directly from Bram Stoker's novel. Recommend that.
It's really good.
It's really cool. But I hope you learn about. We're at the bottom of the hour.
Yeah,
we got to
we're
get
out
out
of
of here. So
Wrap it up.
thank you for joining us on this episode. I hope you learned about vampires. If you have any questions or input on what we said, please leave a comment or email us at shareddiscoveryshow@gmail.com. Check us out on Spotify and Google and Apple, all those places if
Yes.
you're more of a podcast listener, or you probably already are.
Yes.
And thanks BCTV for having us. And so thanks for joining us on episode 13, the horror episode of Shared Discovery. As we close, please make sure to have fun, be kind, play some games, and sign us off, Ron.
Yeah, riches must be divided, but real wealth can be shared.
I love that.
Feel it.
Thanks for joining us.